Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 176, Wilderness Torah. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rofberg.
And our guest today is Zelig Golden. He is the co-founder and executive director of Wilderness Torah, the Center for Earth-Based Judaism. Wilderness Torah awakens and celebrates the earth-based traditions of Judaism to nourish the connections between self, community, earth, and spirit. Wilderness Torah has festival programs celebrating ancient Jewish pilgrimage festivals in their original earth-based context, as well as youth programs, leadership training programs, and a variety of other programs that we'll discuss in the interview. Before founding Wilderness Torah, Zelig Golden was an environmental lawyer. He also holds a master's degree in Jewish studies from the Graduate Theological Union. And while he wasn't a rabbi when he founded Wilderness Torah, he is a rabbi now, having recently received rabbinic ordination from Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal. And he had been previously ordained as a Maggid by Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, one of the founders of Jewish Renewal. We're excited to jump into this conversation about Judaism and the wilderness. So Zelig Golden, welcome to Judaism Unbound. It's so great to have you.
It is great to be here.
So I thought we could get started just by understanding a little bit in depth about what Wilderness Torah is about and what you concretely do.
Yeah, so Wilderness Torah's mission is to awaken the earth-based traditions, to help people connect with themselves, each other, the earth, and living alive Judaism. And I think that the mission is deeper than that, though. It's not just about the earth. It's really about using nature as a context to explore being human, to explore being in community, and to explore being connected to Judaism in an open, authentic way. So in a sense, nature is a context to really bring all these different aspects alive. And what do we actually do? We provide multi-generational community experiences. We have a grand Passover in the desert, gathering out in the desert near Death Valley for a 5-day multi-generational festival that isn't just about telling the story, but it's about really entering into a field where we cultivate and embrace liberation. Sukkot on the farm, where we gather on the farm to enjoy the harvest, but also to the deeper work of connecting with and celebrating water and invoking the rain through the ancient rain dance. And Shavuot, we gather, not just to read the Torah, but the deeper work of revelation. How do we open ourselves to and cultivate ourselves to be open to what wants to be revealed from without and perhaps from without? And we also have a whole youth program adventure for kids K through end of high school now. So Bechutz is our Sunday school outdoors, entirely nature-based Sunday school. The Nature is our 11 to 13-year-old nature-based rite of passage program, really asking the deeper questions of those becoming adolescent. What is your fire? How do you tend your fire as your biological fire comes online? And using the Jewish tradition to help these young people come of age in a challenging world. And then we are just now launching the Shomrim Neshama Quest, Shomrim Guardians, cultivating the teen guardians of the community fire. And the new Neshama Quest, the Soul Quest, is a week-long backpacking trip in the wilderness where high school youth get to do the deeper work of getting ready to enter into the young adult sphere. And then in addition to our community programs and our youth programs, we're also doing a lot of work in the thought leadership realms and training both leaders in the Bay Area where we're based, but also in the broader Jewish world to take this earth-based Jewish wisdom and tradition to places all across the world.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to create this organization, when that was, and who you were at that time, and why you created it?
Yeah, Wilderness Torah really began to come to life around 2007. At that time, I was working as an environmental attorney with the Center for Food Safety, doing federal litigation in opposition to the USDA and Monsanto around genetically modified foods and their crops and the failure to comply with environmental law. I was fighting the good fight, you might say. Julie Wolk was a community organizer for the Rainforest Action Network. John Rosenfield was working for a local conservation group working on water resources issues. And Adam Edel was a local teacher in a farm to table school program. And the four of us came together and said, we really want to do something unique. And that Sukkot in the Farm emerged. That was in 2007. And that also came, in a personal level, that came out of my spiritual journey in July of 2007, just a couple months before I went on a vision quest. I was really asking the deeper question, like, why am I on earth? What's my purpose? And on that vision quest on a mountain on the California-Nevada border, there was this powerful moment at the very end where I got this, you might call it a vision, or it feels like a seed of a vision that said, get your people back to nature. And I came back with that. And that's when the conversation between the four of us sort of really heated up. And we said, let's do this. And we did Sukkot on the farm. And then Passover in the Desert came next in 2008. And a year later, Upstart Bay Area emerged as a Bay Area nonprofit incubator. And Julie and I had decided to step forward and take this Wilderness Torah idea to the next level. And Wilderness Torah was off and running.
Could you try and distill for us what it is about nature that's so thoroughly called to you personally, and maybe why it seems to be doing so for others as well?
Absolutely. I mean, at a very fundamental level, we live in a time of disconnection. You might say people across the world live in a crisis of disconnection right now. And that crisis of disconnection manifests in the psychological epidemics that we're seeing, certainly in the United States and beyond. Now, there are sociological studies and psychological studies that have directly linked this to a lack of nature connection. Now, this isn't why I went for Wilderness Torah, but in the early days of developing Wilderness Torah, I began to see this landscape and that I was a part of this landscape. And for me personally, as an environmental lawyer, I was fighting for the thing I loved, but I was also depressed. I was sort of lost. I had a bit of a spiritual crisis, and that's what led me to want to go to the mountain for a vision quest, because I didn't know who I was, even though I was very successful as a lawyer. You might say I was deep down, I wasn't totally happy. And we see this, I think, as a trend across Western modern America, especially, but Western culture. People are just asking themselves, like, who am I? What is this all about? Well, our lack of relationship to the place that we come from, I think, is the place to begin looking. It's foundational. And our Torah, shows us in the very beginning of the Torah, says that earthling, Adam, comes from the earth, Adamah. If you are not connected to the source of your beingness, then, what are you? Who are you? And I think this is a really fundamental question we all have to ask. When I started asking that question, I looked into the Torah, and I didn't have to scratch very hard, very deep, because there it was. All of our ancestors, began this Jewish story in the wilderness. And then when we encountered the land, that relationship to nature only deepened. That's why we have, a very profoundly well-developed sense of agricultural laws and mores around how we relate to and treat the land, including 1 out of every 7 years resting the land out of a deep respect for the need for the land to rest. That's a deep relationship.
One question that comes to my mind, though, is that for the last 2,000 years, it hasn't necessarily been so. And I guess I'm wondering how you understand what you're doing with regard to the map of Jewish history. Do you regard yourself as reaching back to kind of a pre-Judaism, a pre-rabbinic Judaism, and doing what with it to kind of bring it forward and replace, in a sense, rabbinic Judaism, or live in complementarity with it? Or how do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as one trained in rabbinics and one who loves the rabbinic tradition, I love the Talmud, I love the Mishnah before it, and I love the Torah. That is the foundation upon which all that stands. I love the commentary, I love the Hasidic tradition, and I love the textual tradition. It is juicy and rich, and I love to explore it so that it shows me, the truth inside of me, and also helps me to dance with the masters, for the generations. So certainly I'm not trying to skip over the 2,000 years of rabbinic history. With that said, I think it's something we need to look at, that the rabbinic tradition is based in cultural trauma. That when our temple was destroyed, we were disconnected from the taproot of, our cultural system, a very specific place and traditions that developed around that place. Our festivals were all around bringing, the produce from the land to the fire and that place. The rhythms of life were based on, that environment. And when the temple fell and the fire was put out, the rabbis were faced with, one of the most difficult things that tradition could be faced with. How do we survive in a time when our homeland's been destroyed? As a side note, the Dalai Lama, facing the same question himself, gathered some rabbis together. We know this from the book Jew and the Lotus, that the Dalai Lama, asked this very difficult question himself. So it's not a unique Jewish question. What do you do in the face of this cultural trauma being removed from your homeland? Jewish summer camp is not just the only answer, although it's been a profound response to keeping the youth engaged. But I think the rabbis did something absolutely revolutionary and absolutely profound and beautiful, and something that I deeply honor and respect, which is they took those traditions that were rooted in the land. And the way I metaphorize it, my mythic understanding of the moment of the creation of the Mishnah and later the Talmud was like the rabbis understood that they had to take the seed bank from the land that was the nourishing roots of our tradition and draw it out of the land and, in a sense, desiccate it and paint it, onto the pages of the Mishnah and the Talmud. The rabbinic tradition is a post-traumatic response to exile. Absolutely profound in its complexity and its minutia, wrestling with details that now sometimes seem, interesting and also absurd at times. And if you look at, what's happening now today, the generations that are coming up, people want it real and they want it connected. This does not mean we have to return back to the land of Israel necessarily. Although I believe and love Israel, I think it means that wherever Jews are today, they need to be given the opportunity to unpack the suitcase of their tradition and replant it. And so this is not to go back to pre-rabbinic. It's to take ancient understanding of our earth-based roots, integrate it with the last 2,000 years of rabbinic wisdom, and say, what's next? And Wilderness Torah is one of many explorations of what is next.
So could you give us a description of one of your larger festivals and how what you just talked about manifests through that event?
Yeah, I can start with Passover in the Desert. It's becoming sort of our flagship annual festival. We gather in the desert near Death Valley. It's called the Panamint Valley. It's 4 hours from Los Angeles, 8 hours from the Bay Area, and it's in Mamash Desert. You go there and you are in the wilderness. There's no cell phone reception. It looks like you're in the Arava of southern Israel. And we literally build an encampment in the wilderness, and we gather, close to 300 people this past year for 5 days of all ages. Children in a cool kids program, teens in a beautiful teen program being sent out and received back from the wilderness for an epic journey. Adults doing, ecstatic Kabbalah Shabbat, doing learning together, but also exploring, the four worlds of existence, our physical reality, our emotional reality, our spiritual reality, and also the intellectual roots of our tradition. So we're really working on the whole village. And in this village, we're also asking the question, how do we gather and do the deep work of liberation together? And part of that is by having a beautiful Kabbalah Shabbat. Part of that is simply being in the desert and with intentionality, sending everyone out to the desert for a few hours of heat bodedut, of deep solo time. Another piece that we're doing in the particular earth-based tradition that we awaken at Passover in the desert is that we put down a fire, a sacred fire, and we tend that fire for 7 days. It's in the respect of that line in Leviticus. I think it's line 6. It says, Eish tamid tukad al hamizbeach, lo techba. You shall put an eternal fire on the altar. It shall never go out. And yes, the Hasidic masters say that eternal fire lives in your own heart. Each one of us has a mizbeach, an altar in our heart of fire that we carry. But almost like the eternal light that you see in most synagogues, an LED sitting above the ark, it's not actually quite real. And I would say that most people that come to Wilderness Torah, including myself, are tired of being taught to pretend. We want the rituals to be real. And when we put down a fire and use it for sacred purposes and pray, something opens, something deeply magical. And when people leave passing in the desert, they ask the question, how do I go back? After being in a space where liberation feels real, how do I go back now to daily life that is so fragmented? Well, we hope that we're training people about the need for connection and also the ways in which Jewish tradition open up these spaces during these special holiday times that is so profound if we ask ourselves how to do it now in a way that works.
I heard a story. Well, it's not a story really. Somebody told me about their experience leaving an intensive Jewish retreat. I don't remember where this person's retreat was, but it was a Jewish retreat somewhere beautiful and somewhere in nature. And they asked somebody who had been on that retreat before them, how long does this sort of stick with you afterwards? Like how can you hold on to it and how long does it stay with you? And the person they were talking to said, till the first gas station. Not long was the answer, because unfortunately you do have this incredible, maybe the word is transcendent, maybe the word is connected, maybe the word is beautiful. I don't know, whatever it might be. I've certainly had those experiences where I'm in the woods or somewhere, and then it just all comes sort of crashing down, and you want to hold on to it. You want it to sort of embed itself in you for the rest of the year, but it's very challenging. And so I wanted to name that for a couple reasons. One, I'm curious if you have strategies about that, how people can make this not just, I go on a retreat to the desert for Passover. That's the one moment I feel connected, and the rest of the time I feel like I wish I was at that retreat. Like, I'm curious if you have strategies, but also I want to push a little bit, because I think one thing I certainly forget, and I think what a lot of us forget, is like nature isn't this vacuous term for like trees in retreat centers in the woods somewhere. Like, I live in Providence, Rhode Island. Like, I live in nature. Like, I live in a place that is very urban, but it's still a kind of nature. And there's still, I think, ways to be in touch with the land that we live on. And by the way, I live on land that is historically Narragansett and Wampanoag land. We could go into some of the indigenous questions too. Like, I think that we sort of segment nature in our heads as, that special place we can go to every once in a while. Like, we do that at our own peril. So I'm curious, basically, what are those strategies that you can take these experiences and not just have them be awesome one-time moments, but actually sort of change you and imbue into your life? And also, like, how should we think about our lives, whether it's for you, like in the Bay Area, or Dan in Chicago, or me in Providence, or listeners wherever? How can we think of that also as like a kind of nature?
I do believe that humans have to understand that nature is not a place you go to. And actually, in Providence, I took my freshman year environmental studies class. And Professor Ward there asked this question on the first day of class. He said, are we humans part of nature or outside of nature? We have to understand that we aren't just a part of nature. We are nature, period. Again, the first chapter in Genesis, Adam, Adama, earthling is earth, earth is earthling. We are the same thing. We are part of one living, breathing system. Reb Zalman Shakta Shalomi, Zichrono Livracha, my teacher, and I think one of the great visionaries of the modern period, his core Torah, one of his core Torahs was, we must understand that if we don't change our collective understanding that we are part of Gaia and develop a Gaian consciousness, then humans are lost on this earth. The earth will be fine, but humans will be lost on this earth. And so, no, Passover in the Desert is not a one-off retreat. It's a training program. You come to Passover in the Desert to have a deep experience that you can take home. And it is hard to go home, Lex, absolutely. And if you go one time and that's the only thing you ever do, that's Jewish in nature, you will forget the first gas station. But luckily, the Jewish holidays come around every year. It's not a circle, it's a spiral, and we grow and we develop and we deepen. And after Passover, we have 49 days to remember and to develop upon that, counting the Omer and permuting the spiritual attributes. And that shouldn't just be a conceptual experience, but it should be, how am I integrating liberation from Passover so that I can actually receive something deeper can be revealed? And so the tradition itself provides these points along the Hebrew calendar for integration and continuation of the deepening. So we sit by an all-night fire at Shavuot, and then for Sukkot, we go out and we dance for the rain, And Tu B'Shvat, we go and we pray in the trees, and it continues around like that. For every mountaintop experience, we have to do the chop wood, carry water experience 100 times. So come home, and if you're in Chicago, go sit in your backyard and listen to the birds, because absolutely nature is right there. But then go to Lincoln Woods, Lex, and spend half of the day alone in a wild place, and then return back to your your less wild home and do the daily routine, but then go back out to the wild, once in a while. So we have to cultivate that.
So, Zelig, can you help us understand in a deep way sort of what it is that, as you describe this, what is the job of Judaism? I mean, what is the reason? You said it wasn't in order to preserve Judaism, just so that we preserve it, that's over. So I guess I'm looking to understand, as you see it, how connecting with the stuff of Judaism makes people's lives better or makes the earth better. Like, why is this something that we ought to be doing, and how does it all need to be restructured so that it can do that work?
I was recently asked by one of the elders in the Wilderness Torah community, why do you love Judaism, and what is Judaism good at? And I have multiple answers, but I started with this. I said, Judaism is masterful at holding sacred time for us. So we can live our lives, go to work, have a vacation, go to work, have a weekend, and life can just sort of slide away. But Judaism holds us in rhythms and cycles. The weekly with Shabbat gives us a time to pause, reflect, rest, connect to our community, love our partners, celebrate with family, put the altar of Shabbat table and sit and have a profoundly beautiful meal on Friday night. The holidays open up these portals of connection, what I call medicine. Passover opens up the portal of reawakening and liberation, freedom. What is that like? Every year, what's the next level of freedom we're looking for? Or what's the next level of freedom we want to activate for others in the world through our activism and our tikkun olam, our building a better world? Hanukkah, what's the darkness that we're encountering, and what's the light we want to bring? The Jewish time is amazing. And I believe that our Jewish time is also deeply connected to nature's cycles. Now, it's easier for me in California, like, our sisters and brothers in Israel. Maybe not as easy in New York or even Chicago, but still, it provides us a roadmap that's connected to the seasons, the foods that are coming onto our table, and our spiritual lives. And there's something very profound about that. Secondarily, I think, I know Judaism provides for us a system of values and opportunities to understand what it means to be a good human. And it is not an obvious thing how to walk as a good human on planet Earth today. But the highest echelons of leadership are failing us. Even leadership in our Jewish communities are failing us, in leadership at all scales. But it's there for us to pick up, and when we look at the very critical issues, social issues of our time, or the ecological issues of our time, Judaism provides many, many guideposts, specifically around climate change, which of course is one of the most challenging issues we face. There is instruction right at the very, very center of our tradition. The Shema says, all is one. Listen, all is one. And then it says, now go love with all your soul, with all your heart, with all your might. Then the second paragraph says, if you do this, there will be rain. And if you fail to do this, climate change is going to happen. Well, it's right there. This is not just the pedantic God that we hate from Sunday school. If you go to a deeper understanding, it's actually, a roadmap for how to be a human being on planet Earth. It provides us ancestry. It provides us roots.
I'm thinking about how in the time of the ancient Israelites, when they were connected to the earth all the time, right? Because they were farmers, but they would have these pilgrimage festivals to the temple to connect with some other, even more ancient, right, dimension of what they were looking to connect with. That at least mythically we have often imagined, right, something like the Garden of Eden, where the human beings were with God all the time. Okay, so now we're not with God all the time. So 3 times a year we're going to go for this heightened experience. And in a way, what I'm hearing you describe is a version of that, saying. And I'd love to get into it a little more deeper with you, because I think there's something really here about, we've also explored it in terms of Burning Man a little bit, this idea that that pilgrimage festivals, it's not only about the wilderness and the earth, it's also about the particular power of a pilgrimage festival, something that where you have a heightened experience for a short period of time, and that somehow reconnects you to something that realistically we are disconnected from. I mean, right, I don't think that you're advocating for that everybody should go off the grid and we should get rid of modern technology. And, so I'd love to sort of play that out, because I think there's something really significant here, both about the wilderness and also about how, whatever we want to call Judaism, a religion, or whatever it might become, how something like that can work and ought to work in a way that it does not only recharge people, but I think, like you were saying earlier, also help people ground themselves and root themselves in a deep set of values and concerns that ultimately is only, maybe I shouldn't say only, but is ultimately mostly important if and when they're able to bring that back into the world that they inhabit the rest of the time.
Well, first of all, I want to agree with you 100% that I'm not advocating that everyone leave New York City and go out to a farm. It's actually the case that from many perspectives, New York City is a much more sustainable way of living for a large number of people than everyone having, a country home. Sharing resources, creating urban density. Like, this is one of the ways that we actually use resources well. A grid of renewable energy with renewable food sources, et cetera, would make New York, even stronger in that way. But that said, I think that the natural world, the wilderness, as it were, provides a critical medicine. And if we don't go there periodically, then we're going to miss that core medicine. And that core medicine is actually where we derive our personal and communal understanding of who we are. That when we return with that medicine, we can operate from a place of who we are. I deeply believe that if the majority of people on planet Earth had the opportunity and the privilege to take time out and retreat and ask the question, who am I? And be facilitated to reflect and then receive insight into who I am, and then went back into the world and lived in a world that wanted to uplift who everyone is, the world would be a much more supportive place. The world would be a more collaborative place and a less competitive place. But I think instead the world is a place where people don't know who they are and they're scrambling to just make it. So in the nature, for example, we put youth out alone in nature quite a few times during that 2-year journey. And at the culmination of that journey, they go out by themselves with their own fire all night long. That then lives in them the rest of their lives. You have more access to that deeper soul truth when you're away from people, community, parents, society. So it says in the book of Numbers, one of the books in the Torah, it says that there's this journey that the Israelites are taking from the Midbar to Matana. And then the rabbis in the Talmud, they work on this question and say, well, what the heck are they talking about? What's Midbar, which is the wilderness? And what is Matana, which means the gift? And so the rabbis reflect. They say, well, when we go to the Midbar, the wilderness, we can receive the gift. And they dig deeper and say, well, what does that actually mean? And the rabbis say, well, look at what happened in the wilderness over and over and over again. When you go to the wilderness, that's where you are able to receive Torah, wisdom, truth, personal truth, and collective truth. In fact, they say it's not only that that's where you can receive it, you must do that. You must make yourself like the wilderness in order to receive Torah, the rabbis conclude. But in order to make yourself like the wilderness, you have to go to the wilderness.
So when I hear you talk about the ways that you educate kids in the wilderness outside, I have like a feeling of almost jealousy. It's not really jealousy. Like, I'm very happy that you're doing it. But I think back on my own Jewish educational experiences, and I remember moments where we'd be at Sunday school. And my Sunday school was at a synagogue where literally the backyard, it was gorgeous. There were trees. There was a river like right in the backyard of the synagogue that on Rosh Hashanah, you'd do tashlich. You'd go and throw the bread right there. And we would bother the teachers. We'd be like, can we go outside? It's a beautiful day. Can we like do the lessons outside? And they'd say, like, no, that'll be distracting. And I often was just like, thinking to myself, well, I probably didn't think this at the time, but looking back, yes, exactly. It'd be distracting. Like, you'd be in the midst of the wilderness, and you'd be like living not living, you'd be for 2 hours in Sunday school in the environment that is all over the Torah. And like, what could be better for soaking into Jewish learning? And so I'm curious on that front, like what it means and what it looks like to do this kind of work with kids specifically through your programs like B'Nature. Like, what does it look like to take Jewish education and have it manifest outside? What are some of the challenges of that? What are some of the powerful, amazing things about that? And I guess, like, what do you think changes about students when they experience that versus if they experienced a different kind of Hebrew school, Sunday school learning environment?
Wilderness Torah started in 2007 with a community festival, mostly adults, some kids. After about 2 years, we started to ask the question, why are we doing this? Which we continue to ask, and that answer continues to deepen. But we asked the question then, and one of the answers that came forward was, well, we're doing this for the sake of the village. And so we had to ask, well, what's the purpose of a village? And the purpose of a village is to raise children. And so we came to the conclusion quite early that we had to be offering experiences for kids. And so originally called Gan Torah, Torah Garden, we started offering a Sunday school in the woods, later called B'chutz, which means outside. And really the objective of B'chutz, which is now a K-5 Sunday school in the woods, every other Sunday, basically, we want it to be accessible, and we want it to be alive. And it's 100% in nature, rain or shine. And it uses Judaism more as a container for experience, for emergence with the kids. And so we have the stories from the Torah, we have the fundamental prayers, we have songs, we have Jewish values, we have holidays, we have the Parsha HaShavua, the Torah portion of the week. All these things contextualize adventure in nature. So at the center of the experience is the child. And the context is Jewish tradition and nature. So we come in with our holiday curriculum, our Torah portion curriculum, the games we're going to use, the challenges we're going to use, the nature crafts we're going to deploy, the songs we're going to bring, the food we might make over the fire, etc. And then we train our mentors to watch and see what's really alive and then follow that. So if, some really wild bird activity is happening over the way while we're doing some craft, and one of the kids jumps up and runs after the birds, instead of saying, hey, Billy, come back here. Instead, we might say, hey, guys, let's put our craft down and see what Billy is seeing. We'll follow that. We'll go explore that. And we might learn how to identify a bird song and see what this bird activity is. And then once that bird activity is done, we may pause and sit down in the forest and lay on our backs and look up at the sky, and then the nature becomes the curriculum. It's self-discovery. It's also an empowerment model. Instead of saying, no, you have to do what the adults want you to do, the adults are there to discover what the kids are going to appreciate and bring alive. B'chutz is a Sunday school in the woods that then leads to B'Nature. And B'Nature is, children in nature. It's a Hebrew-English contraction, which was actually named by one of the graduates from the program. It's a 2-year journey. You commit for the 2 years, and we meet once a month on a Sunday for 6 hours, one Wednesday, an evening around a fire, and there's a spring camping trip with parents and their kids, a winter camping trip with just the kids, and a spring camping trip with just the kids. And then all year, the parents have a parallel parent program that they're a part of. And it's to ask the question, what are the changes that these kids are going through, and how do we support them as they transition from childhood into adolescence? And we get real with the fact that they're not becoming adults. They may become adults in relationship to the Torah and the mitzvot, the holy responsibilities. And we do this, and this is right, because as you're transitioning from childhood into this time period, you become sexually active, and therefore you need to have a framework of self-responsibility and responsibility to the community. But ultimately, it's about them finding out who they are in this next stage. And when the context is Jewish story, again, holidays and Torah portions and mythical stories and songs and prayers and from Judaism, then it's the context of Judaism that takes them on that journey. Well, it's fascinating. 9 years later, after having used these programs, we find a couple things. First, I think it's now safe to say that these kids who've gone through B'chutz, but especially B'Nature, they have something that is unique. And they're beginning to recognize it. We now have our first crop of kids who are in their first and second year of college who started with us years ago. And yes, they actually love Judaism more than the rest of their friends. And I've asked them why. They're like, I don't really know. When I say to them, well, do you think it's because it was the Jewish context that helped you have all those other things that you love so much about yourself? And a light bulb goes on and says, yeah. It was that context that created those experiences that are have so deeply nourished me and enabled me to become who I am, that now I actually want to know more about Judaism. Judaism didn't get crammed down their throats at the wrong time. Instead, it became a context for them to become who they want to and are to become. And then they have a really healthy relationship to the tradition.
I'm struggling to kind of separate in my mind the nature part and what I know your teacher and ours, Rab Zalman Schachter Shalomi, one of the founders of Jewish Renewal, talks about as the paradigm shift, right? That we are living in a time of profound shift in the nature of Judaism. And it's interesting, I hadn't thought about this dimension before, but when you were talking earlier about the paradigm shift from biblical Judaism to rabbinic Judaism being partly about the disruption of having been removed from the land, that actually the vast majority of Jews on the earth today are not living in their land of at least recent familial origin. And whether that was Europe or Arab lands or elsewhere, the most Jews today are in Israel or the United States. And I wonder to what extent that plays into the question of paradigm shift. But I'm wondering if I sort of wonder this a lot about the nature-based Jewish organizations, because I'm not such a nature-y kind of person. And I desperately want to go, for example, to Burning Man to experience all sorts of things that I hear that happen there. But the idea that I'm going to be living in sand and, heat, it's very, very scary to me. Like I want to know that there's an air-conditioned van there available for me if I need to take a break from the nature. And I wonder if that the answer is I should suck it up. Everyone should suck it up. There's something unique and important about doing this in nature. Or what we're seeing is something else, which is that part of the paradigm shift has to do with some new orientation towards where Judaism fits in your life. Franz Rosenzweig talked about the idea that rather than everything sort of coming out of the Torah and the text and the tradition, that we're sort of bringing, it's going in the opposite direction in this time in history, and that we have to bring our own experiences into it. And so I wonder if there's an extent to which what you're describing here is an incredible system for people who love nature, and that those of us who don't love nature so much can still really benefit from it by having these heightened pilgrimage type experiences, which I really still want to do. And, I'd love to come to a Wilderness Torah thing and Burning Man, but probably not all the time. And that for those of us who, sort of don't necessarily feel excited about that what we really need is a number of other sorts of ways of connecting with what we're passionate about, what we have deep connections to. And what you're describing here is a model of how that really works in the area that you and many others are really passionate about, which is nature. So I think it's both, but I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit on questions relating to the paradigm shift and what we're really experiencing in terms of where we are in the history of Judaism, not necessarily only connected to nature.
Yeah, I think it is both, and I'm happy to reflect on that. But I do want to answer your question on, do I just need to suck it up or not?
Please,
because I think it touches on something really profound, and I'm a nature lover and I can't get around that. And so I can only see the world from that perspective. But I do see that people who aren't connected to nature are, I think, missing something, and are lacking that medicine I was talking about. But I would say that we shouldn't have them just suck it up, and Dan, I wouldn't just take you and throw you into the most extreme situation. I would want to mentor you and take you on or anyone, in a situation where they don't love nature yet. I would take them on a journey that meets them where they're at in their zone of proximal development. So another important educational, pedagogical thing is what's going to push their edge sufficiently without putting them over their edge so they can grow and expand what is possible for them. Eventually getting you to a place where I'd love to be able to put you out, for 3 nights by yourself, fasting in the forest, so you can come back with a new vision for your life. But that would, we would take the small steps to get there. So I wouldn't make you suck it up, but I want you to go on the journey anyways. I think if everyone did that, we would live in a very different world. With that said, I do think that the paradigm shift that our dear Rebbe is pointing us towards, it's not just about nature, of course, and that using nature as a context for Jewish revival is powerful and not the only relevant one. So the question is like, what is the paradigm shift about and why do we need it? I think Judaism is still stuck in a post-temple destruction reality that continued with, the many ways of oppression that happened, all across Europe and ultimately in the Holocaust. And that 2 generations later, we're still suffering the PTSD of the Holocaust. And that number one, the new paradigm has to address that and not turn our backs on that. How do we do that? There are probably more than one ways to do that. Being in nature, sitting around a fire is one of them. It's the way Wilderness Torah addresses it, that it's a very profound way of addressing and helping us stabilize our nervous system from grief. And then, yes, pick and choose from our religion in ways that bring it alive. I think there are certain parts of the tradition we shouldn't push away, so we have to also be careful. But within that, the leaders who are bringing new creativity need to be uplifted and supported within a container to say what really works, Changing prayer so it's beautiful, fun, and uplifting needs to happen. Changing the way we do holidays so it's relevant and vibrant needs to happen, And that's the core of the paradigm shift, or what Joanna Macy calls the great turning, the cultures that resonate with the needs for today. And really the only way we're going to have that happen is if we, leaders of today, look to the youth of today and ask them what they really want and need. And it cannot project or assume what that is. So that's part of it. It's not a thing, it's a process.
I want to ask you a little bit more about your personal story, your personal journey, because I think that one of the things that we've really advocated for on this show is that regular people should feel the license to bring their own talents and their own passions and their own sense of experimentation and adventure into this work. And it's really inspiring to me to know that when you launched this and this movement, that you were no kind of a rabbi, you were a lawyer like me. And and so I'd love to go back a little bit, to that time a decade ago and ask you why you did this. I mean, why you were among the few who really say, hey, I have a vision here. I want to do this in a serious way. I want to, whether that means starting an organization or like you did at the beginning, not starting an organization, but just doing some really serious experiments, and to reflect a little bit about how we might encourage more of that. But then I also want to ask you why some number of years ago you decided that you did want to become a rabbi and that you did enroll in a formal program. And I'm curious both about the journey to make that decision, and I'm also curious about how that connects to this question of paradigm shift, because the office of rabbi came out of the previous paradigm shift. And I'm wondering whether we need a new office and what it looks like when those who really, and you're not the only one who really start getting into this and creating amazing things, like our guest of just a few weeks ago, Greg Marcus, who is also a regular Jew who's created a whole new approach to Musar, has just enrolled in rabbinical school. So I'm really interested in that dynamic as well.
I was raised in a context where I had a lot of opportunity, but also where there was a lot of fear of not having enough. And I could say the whole Jewish context, exemplifies that, see our previous conversation about, trauma and PTSD culture. And so I was deeply encouraged, to put it nicely, I suppose you'd say, to become a professional, to get a lot of security so I could be safe and provide for my family, which are values that I embrace today, and hopefully in a healthy way, but it shouldn't be the driving force of one's life, like I experienced it being mine in the early part of my life, which caused a lot of psychological complications, a lot of challenge, a lot of suffering, you might say. It led me to become a lawyer, wearing a white hat to be a good guy, to fight the fight. But it was a lawyer nonetheless, which, gave me the office of prestige, power, and hopefully financial security. And even though it was in the public interest and it was fighting for the environment and all that, I got to the end of my rope with it, And so I really started asking the questions like, who am I? Why am I here? And that journey, which include, psychological counseling, a real deep exploration. I ended up coming up with a few principles that I believe. One is that I believe everyone is born at the right time and that everyone has a purpose. And if we are given a chance to do the work of exploring ourselves and finding our purpose, then we'll find our place in this time to serve with our purpose. And then for me, I discovered that my purpose was not to fight the good fight, although I deeply believe that we need people to fight the good fight. So thank you for all those out there fighting the good fight. But that was not for mine to do. That was based on some other impulse that wasn't a healthy impulse inside myself. And then so I asked the question, well, what am I here to do? And it was a very scary question to ask, having invested so many years and become really a good lawyer. And out on a mountain alone praying, I got the answer, do what you feel is true in terms of taking your people back to nature. And so I followed that impulse. And Wilderness Torah had no financial support. And I took a huge leap of faith. And it was super scary. But I did it. And it was on the drive to Passover in the desert, not many days afterwards, that we got the call from the foundation giving us our first grant to actually make Wilderness Torah work financially. So it was a leap of faith. Would I do that now with a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage? Maybe not. But so that's why we need to take people on these journeys when they're, at an age where they can make big leaps and take big chances and experiment. But I became a rabbi, not because I think we need rabbis per se. I became a rabbi because I was deeply yearning to learn Torah and to root down the impulses that I was having and the culture emergence experience that I was facilitating and the kind of teaching that I wanted to offer around the renewal of tradition in this earth-based direction. And becoming something as a rabbi was not my goal, but to be able to root down my teaching and my facilitation within the tradition felt very important. And I couldn't figure out a way to do it other than this.
So as we close out, I'm curious to get your take on a question that Dan and I have been wrestling with around halakha. So around, this in the traditional sense, Jewish law, but we've been also talking with guests who define halakha differently. And I have a sense that you probably define it differently, but we'll see. And I wanted to ask the following. So we have been wrestling with, on the issue of paradigm shift, whether and how and in what sense halakha is going to be or should be part of the Jewish future, and also ways in which maybe the ways halakha has manifested in the past are not best situated for the future. And I guess I wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Like, if you were to craft or diagnose a halakha that would meet the needs of Jews today, would comment on the issues that they care about, that we care about, would allow us to wrestle on a day-to-day basis with the issues that we need to be and with the issues that we want to be, what would you sort of draw up for us?
I think that we need to look at not just navel gazing within Judaism, but how we relate to our communities around us. Race, gender, and inclusivity, these things should be part of our halakha now, because these are the issues of our time. If you look at millennials and what they're concerned with, they are concerned with white privilege. They're concerned with, how we understand gender norms and the spectrum and how we include people. Well, these things should become the halakha. And halakha should be shifting and changing with the shifting and changing mores of the time. It moves too slowly. The halakhic practice, the halakhic process that we have in Judaism today, with the tshuva here or there and new codes being developed, it moves too slowly. Reb Zalman, wrote his book, Integral Halakha, which I'm sure came up in your conversation. And it is something that's important that we are able to get down to the deep values and the deep intentions that feel true and alive in the community at the time, and then move the halakha, or the way we walk together, which, the halech is to walk, so the halakha is the walk. So it's not a walk that was codified for us, some 500 years ago or later, but the walk needs to be what the community agrees to walk, with the roots of the tradition. Like, that's what halakha should be. So we should have a way in which halakha includes a process for co-creating halakha by the people all the time. And one of the halakhic codes should also say, maybe this is the beginning, is that those who set the halakha are not the ones who are in power, but power is held by the collective, with the elders supervising the collective, so that the collective doesn't get too far out of line. There needs to be limitations again, but it should be adaptive, it should be in motion, and it should be deeply rooted. But it needs to stay alive and relevant. Otherwise, the next generation will simply turn their back on it. So how do we create a way to walk together that's alive and breathing? That should be top of the list.
Zelig Golden, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. It's been real great to be with you both. Appreciate the work you're doing.
And thanks, of course, also to all of you out there listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we hope that you'll tune in again in the future. We want to close out this conversation in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. And there are a wide variety of ways for you to do that. First, you can head to our Facebook page, Judaism Unbound. Second, you can go to our Twitter feed at Judaism Unbound. Third, you can go to our website, judaismunbound.com. And last but not least, you can email us. Email us for sure. Dan@judaismunbound.com or Lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we like to make is that we really deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation you're able to allot and send in our direction. And you can do that at judaismunbound.com/donate with either a one-time gift or a monthly recurring donation. So thanks so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this one. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound.